Thank you for tuning in to the Keto Answers podcast. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin. This episode is a special one. We have Craig Emmerich on the show, who is the author of the recent book, Keto, with his wife, Maria Emmerich. They've done a lot in the space, and we tackle a lot of different issues and myths about the ketogenic diet, why it's healthy, where people can be having stalled and how to get past them. But what I really enjoyed was the foray into Craig's experience with Lyme and how keto and his approach treating it has been successful, and where people are probably missing a lot of information on there. This is a problem that has affected, my family and friends, and so it's super important, and I think could be tremendously beneficial to people tuning in. So, you're going to learn a lot about keto in this episode, but something that's kind of a little different from what we usually do in chatting about a Lyme-specific condition treatment, but there's a lot in here, so tune in, and I hope you enjoy. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and best information about the ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. With that being said, let's get into the show. Craig, thanks for coming on the show, buddy.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I was just reaching out to you and Maria as I finished up your book. You guys have been in the scene for a long time, and you've done a lot of great work with your recent book, Keto, with a period at the end. Correct?
Thanks.
Yeah, so I just wanted to dig into some of the things that you put in the book, because a lot of the problems that people have that I've seen on a ketogenic diet need to be kind of repeated over and over and over again as the space grows. There's so much misinformation that people are getting, and they get really confused, and they're not getting results for that reason. So I think that it's kind of an awful thing about how the internet's expanded right now. Nobody knows really kind of where to get this stuff, and you guys have worked with a lot of people over a long period of time and have a kind of a results-driven approach. So can you just give me kind of a background on how you thought about creating a lot of the content from the book and where you guys came up with a lot of it?
Yeah, we wanted to cover two main, a few main things, but the overall picture of this book was about, first of all, what is a well-formulated ketogenic diet, and why is it good, and how can you utilize your biology to reverse disease process, all of that. But also another tenet of this book was to, like you said, there's a lot of voices coming into this space. It's getting very popular. Maria's been coaching clients on ketogenic diets and helping them heal for, over 15 years. So, we've learned the mistakes and things to avoid, and, the experience of, like you said, results-based with our clients, what works, what doesn't. And we wanted to kind of dispel the myths and put all the facts in this book of how to do it right.
Well, how did you guys get into keto for the first time, or you more specifically?
Yeah, so my wife Maria, she got into it before me. She actually she grew up having issues like PCOS and IBS and acid reflux, and also being overweight. She having extra weight she was carrying. She tried to do the what she was taught, which was, the food pyramid and healthy whole grains and low fat and running. And she was up to running marathons, and it wasn't working. So she's like, okay, something's not working here. Something's not right. There's got to be a better way. She actually went into school for nutrition and exercise science at the university, and still was not getting the right. She was getting kind of the same message, right? That food pyramid type of message, that you need lots of whole grains and low fat, and that's the solution. And she had done that. She knew it didn't work for her. So she started researching on every paper she could get, books, and then writing her own books. And in the process of researching for those, finding this path to more of a low carb, moderate protein, high fat type of lifestyle, which is a ketogenic lifestyle, and started doing it herself and seeing results. She reversed her PCOS. She no longer has IBS or acid reflux. losing extra weight she was carrying. She was just getting results. And so she kept following that path, and then, started coaching clients. Me, it took a little longer. I have electrical engineering degree, and I was in, being a product manager for different companies. And I brewed my own beer, and I was kind of, not as quick to transition, but I saw her results. And that's what kind of pulled me over is during the week, I would eat her whatever she made. On the weekends, I would kind of eat whatever I wanted, or go to restaurants or whatever, but I would notice how I would feel. And on the weekends, I would feel sluggish. I would have, GI issues. I'd drink beer. I'd have, diarrhea and these type of things. So I just took note of, this isn't making me feel good. And I just eliminated it all completely then, and saw my own improvements in health and how I felt and mental clarity and all of these things that we see with this lifestyle.
Did you have a kind of an immediate feedback loop, or was that kind of an overtime thing that you noticed?
Definitely over time for us. Like I said, I started by just kind of eating whatever she made me during the week, and then still having whatever on the weekends, and then slowly transitioned to less of that, and then I eliminated it completely on the weekends, but still had my beer, on the weekends. But then I, again, just saw when I would have that beer the next day, I would feel, like I had bad water or something, because, I had GI issues the next day. And I just never finally connected it that, the gluten in the beer is just not agreeing with me, and I had to cut that out too.
Right. I think that connecting these things and getting that feedback loop a little shorter is always beneficial for people from a behavior change standpoint with nutrition. Like our main goal as a company is to push things forward and make sure that people understand that the choices that they make with food can impact them. And I think that one of the really tough things about food is that you eat something in the feedback that you get from it can be days, it can be weeks, it can be months, years before you start feeling results of it. And so, for instance, whenever I eat gluten or wheat, I get acne, but it's not until two days later, roughly. And so, if it were like as I was chewing it, I was developing cystic acne, I'd be like, oh shit, I should probably cut this out of my diet. And
exactly.
And this is one of those things where like so much nutrition is a delayed response. You don't get overweight, you don't get fat on eating one or two bagels. It's an accumulative effect. And so, I think that when people start having I've heard a lot of stories like yours where people clean up their diet a lot and then start minimizing the things that they used to be doing. And it's almost like you're driving down the freeway and you've never cleaned your windshield. You clean it, and then all of a sudden you start realizing, oh, when bugs splatter on the windshield, that's not good. Yeah. And I think that you have a frame of reference to compare things to start isolating things is a problem.
And just like you said, like gluten, I saw a study that, showed that you can have reactions, weeks after one exposure to gluten, one meal if you were abstaining from it. You don't get that immediate feedback. So it's a little hard to connect the dots sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's where we try to guide our clients and say, all right, we've done this. We know it, we know the science behind it and why. Just follow this and you'll feel a lot better.
Yeah. One of the things I like that you guys mentioned in the book about, kind of this misconception that you kind of put in there that there's two primary camps of people that say, as you go into a ketogenic lifestyle with the specific goal to lose fat, which I think a lot of people are approaching it with.
Yeah.
There's people who think that every calorie in versus every calorie out, the traditional approach, is the only way. And then there's people who think calories just don't matter at all.
Yeah.
And I think that you guys make a really good point, and I've kind of been in this third, very small minority camp for a long period of time, which is that, fuel sources do matter. You can definitely overeat on a ketogenic diet. However, there's a lot of different reasons why that would be the case. Can we just kind of break that down a little bit and just talk about why both camp one and camp two are a little bit misinformed and how you got to the approach you guys are at now?
Yeah, definitely. So there is, like you said, there's some people that are wrongly kind of stating that calories don't matter, that you can just eat until you're full all the time. And, and there's a couple issues with that. Number one, and it all kind of does relate back to hormones. Hormones, some people are leptin resistant, right? And so they don't get the satiety signaling that they should. And so that, eat until you're full doesn't necessarily work for them until they've healed or reversed that leptin resistance. That's just one example. But the other part of it is, so yes, calories do matter, but hormones also matter. And the reason the hormones matter is how you respond to the food and the macronutrient breakdown that you get, right? And not just from a hormone perspective, but also from things like thermic effective food. Protein has a 25% thermic effective food. That means if you eat 100 calories of protein, you really only result in about 75 calories, because it takes a lot of energy to turn that protein into something a body can use. Or something like fat only has a 3% thermic effective food. So if you eat 100 calories of fat, you get 97 calories in the body, whether it's used as fuel in the body or stored in your fat cells, right? So there's that component. That really is 25 versus 3%. That's it, just on that 100 calories consumed. Add that up over on a diet, and that's significant. But back to the hormone component. The best thing you can have for a diet for weight loss is something that restricts how much you're eating, total input, while keeping your hormones in check so that you're not starving and having cravings all day long, so that you stick with complying with that calorie restricted diet, so that your body can use more stored body fat for fuel, which is fat loss. Right. And if you can do all that while eating foods that are very nutrient dense, so you get those micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals that your cells need, that's kind of ideal. That's where you want to be if you're trying to lose weight as well as heal. A lot of our clients, they come to us and they've got all of these issues, whether it's diabetes, like I said, acid reflux, GI issues. They come to us for help, and they get off all these medications and reverse these issues. The weight loss is kind of like a secondary bonus, because they just feel so much better. And, that's kind of that feedback loop, like you're saying, of paying attention to how you feel based on the inputs or what you're putting into your body.
Yeah. One of the things I try to liken this to is that it's kind of like driving a car. So people who think there's calories in, calories out is the only thing that matters is like saying every single car out there is going to have the same miles per gallon no matter what fuel you put into it, and no matter how you drive it. And then I think of it as like a hormonal process, that how you drive it is kind of how you get the fuel out of it. And so if you're driving a car like an idiot, expect to like get fewer miles per gallon out of it. And you can for sure overfill that car's fuel tank. And once it spills over, that's gaining fat. And so it's not as simple, in my opinion, as just saying like, oh, if you eat this many calories, you just have to burn this many calories to lose this amount of weight. And so I think it's a very complicated issue. And that's why people, I think, get a little frustrated, because there's not a very succinct answer as far as, oh, well, this equals this, and that's it, period. So yeah. I mean, I think there is a lot of that goes into it.
Well, and the other aspect of it is the way we look at it is weight loss is about 80% diet. Getting the diet right so that you can get your intake right of how much you're eating is the biggest component. It's very hard to exercise your way out of a bad diet, right? If you're, think about a marathon. An entire marathon run in a day is really only about 1 pound of body fat for fuel.
Right.
You can't sustain that, right? Like, you can't run a marathon every day. So, you got to address both sides of it. And one side is the diet.
Yeah. And so I think that kind of the thermal effect food thing that you mentioned is something that a lot of people don't realize either. And I've been getting into, and I tried recently, our carnivore diet, where you eat only animal products. And I felt pretty ridiculous on that, pretty amazing. And I think that I've just seen so much anecdotal evidence about this and it helping people. And this is one of the things that I initially thought as well, is that, okay, people are getting a lot of results in this for a lot of different reasons, but I think one of the main ones as far as a weight loss is one that is just, it's simple, and that you don't have this temptation to pour oils on everything and have these crazy fat bombs all the time and just chow down fat, but also of how much protein you're getting is way more than a traditional ketogenic diet. And I think that leads to a lot of micronutrient intake and a lot of satisfaction and satiety with your meals, with having that increased thermal effect of food and not needing to eat as much. What are your thought processes on this?
Yep, that's definitely a big component of it. Number one, I think a lot of people, they say, feel better. I think a lot of problems with people who are going into keto, they go in and they follow some bad advice and they don't get enough protein. And that can cause a lot of things. It can cause hair loss. It can mess up your thyroid and do all these things that make you not feel that great. Getting enough protein is critical, not just for preserving your lean mass so that you don't lose muscle over time, but also for these other processes. And, we get so many people, come to us, I started keto, my hair is falling out and all this. I have them up their protein to what we would consider a moderate level, a proper level, and it stops. And that's such a key part of it. But going beyond that to more like a carnivore, like you're talking, I think there's two aspects to it that make it successful for a lot of people. Number one is, like you're saying, the thermic effect of food. Protein, you have a high thermic effect of food. So those calories you're eating, you strip off 25% of those calories just processing that meat. It's very energy intensive to process. The other part of it is protein is very satiating. If you look at, putting down calorie for calorie, a 500 calorie bulletproof coffee, which somebody might be able to down in a few minutes, versus 500 calories of steak. First of all, it's going to be a lot harder to eat that steak, and it's going to take you longer, and it's going to stimulate leptin better, that you're full when you're eating it. But also, you're going to stay full a lot longer on that steak because it's more satiating. And then, of course, you get the thermic effect food on top of that. But also, I think another component of it with the carnivore aspect is the nutrients that you get in your food. There's so many important functions in the body that come from those micronutrients. All your cells, they crave those vitamins and minerals, especially if you're trying to reverse disease. You need even more of them to, if you've been eating deficient in magnesium or potassium for a long time, you need a lot more of it to reverse the disease process and get your body back in balance. Well, in our book, I discuss how animal proteins are actually very nutrient dense. If you look at them, some of our charts in the book, I've got like 15 different vitamins and minerals, and per 100 grams of product, you look at beef, it beats out across a much wider range of vitamins and minerals, kale, apples, blueberries, a lot of these things that we consider superfoods as far as nutrient density. Beef by itself beats them. And it's something that's kind of been lost, I think, in the understanding of what's in our food these days. Of the 15 vitamins and nutrients, beef or beef liver is number 1 or number 2 in all but 5 of the categories, where kale actually beats them out a little bit. So, I mean, refocusing on what's nutrient dense in our food, protein is very important from that aspect.
Yeah, and I think that the micronutrient deficiencies that people have, they don't really realize that a lot of hunger can stem from that stuff from a certain degree. And so, I mean, my experience when I was on this is that I was just getting way more nutrients in my meat. I mean, I have a local farm in Austin that I got it from, like super high quality stuff. And I was concerned to a certain point of not getting enough food, because like I would be so full and I could not eat another bite of steak after like one steak. Like I would make 2 or 3.
And that's back to the, what we're talking about earlier about, the ideal for a weight fat loss diet. You want to be able to consume less calories and stay full, right? We get people all the time. We just put out a protein sparing modified fast cookbook. So protein sparing modified fasts are basically days where you're basically kind of carnivore, right? You're just eating quality animal proteins, getting a little more than your typical protein goal, but then very little to no carbs. But then you ramp down the fat from like a keto weight loss level to a lot lower, like maybe only 30, 40 grams of fat. What that does is two things. Number one, the primary thing from a weight loss perspective is it forces your body to use more stored body fat for fuel. When you're keto, you can use dietary fat or stored body fat equally. The body doesn't care. It's kind of primed to use either with aplomb, right? So if you put less into your mouth, it's going to use more off your body. And what's amazing about it is this protein sparing modified fast. It's only about, if it's formulated properly, maybe 600 calories, right, to maybe 800 calories for the day. But we get people who say they can't even eat that much.
Yeah.
They're full. And if you can eat 800 calories and be full and not have any cravings, that's a pretty good place to be when you're trying to lose body fat.
Right. And I think that Ted Nyman said something like, if you're high fat, all you need is low carb.
Exactly. If your body is already high fat, then your diet just needs to be low carb.
Right, which is kind of an awesome way to put it. And one of the things too that I know that you guys are big on is amount of protein, like you mentioned before. A lot of people are getting too little. And when I post stuff on Instagram of like, hey, I'm going to eat this big plate of meat, and people go, well, I thought you supported a ketogenic diet. Like this goes completely against it. And I'm like, okay. The myth that any protein in your bloodstream turns to donuts because it converts into glucose immediately is just a false assumption of physiology. Can you kind of dive into this a little bit?
Yeah, that's a big one. So first of all, gluconeogenesis, that's the process of your body turning protein into glucose. It's something that, number one, you couldn't be ketogenic without it, right? Your body, there's certain body parts, your brain neurons and things that can only run on either ketones or glucose. So you need a little bit of glucose around in the body to continue to function. Well, if you're not eating any in your diet, it's got to get it from somewhere. And so gluconeogenesis kicks in to make sure your blood sugar doesn't dip too low. That's enables you to be ketogenic in your diet. Without that, you would not be around, right? So number one, it's not something to be feared. It's what actually enables a ketogenic diet. Number two, it's primarily demand driven. So it will kick in when blood sugar gets too low to boost it back up, right? Our bodies are really good at managing the fuel level in the blood, given a steady state. So, when you eat, if fuel coming in, so you eat through your diet, it's going to partition and use something called oxidative priority to take care of these fuels and drive the fuel supply in the blood back down. It's kind of like a car. You don't want to run a car with too much fuel coming in and run it too rich. You're going to burn up the engine. So we want a tight control over how much fuel is in the blood. And that includes everything from alcohol, ketones, protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And so it's going to tightly try to control what's in the bloodstream at any given moment. And so it's not going to just arbitrarily pump up glucose when protein's coming in, because first of all, it primarily wants to use protein to build lean mass, to break it into amino acids and build new muscle, build and repair tissues. And so the body's smart in that way. It's not going to just arbitrarily push up your glucose just because you got protein coming in.
Right. And I think people, like you said, it's demand driven. So if people have a misunderstanding, I think, of the role of glucose in your body, like you said, you need it. And so it's not like you go on a ketogenic diet and your ketones go up and glucose goes to zero in your bloodstream. You would die.
Yeah.
You would be dead. So
exactly.
You need a certain buffer, and that's normal. And as you mentioned, demand driven means that your body, just like with endogenous cholesterol production, will make what it needs to get the job done. That doesn't mean that if you continue to eat protein, it is a linear curve that the more protein you eat, the more blood sugar you'll have. That's not how it works.
Correct. And the statement that too much protein will turn to glucose, it's probably a true statement, but the important factor in it is how much, right? It's not, moderate protein levels. It's like 3 times a moderate protein level in
Right.
one meal might actually start pushing it up because you got an oversupply of fuel, right?
And-
But that's a very high level that frankly would be very hard to even eat. I mean, if you sit down and try to eat 3 times your daily protein level in one meal, it's going to be hard to do.
Yeah, it's impossible, especially when you look at hyperpalatability of foods, and like when I was just eating only meat versus if I had meat and a baked potato and a glass of wine and all sort of
Yeah.
stuff, where I could switch modes and eat more of everything because I had salt and sweet and savory and all these different tastes. You can
Yep.
eat more, but if you just if you limit things to 1 or 2 or 3 food groups, you inherently eat less just because of that as well.
Yeah, we talk about that a little bit in the book as well of, variety on the plate. That's something that, like a buffet, you can put 50 different flavors on a plate, little sample of each, and you can switch it up, and you don't signal that satiety signaling as well because you're switching it up, like you said, that hyperpalatability. That's why a lot of our plans, we get people to ask, can I add some side dishes and things to this? It's like, no, just focus on the food that's there. It's nutrient dense. You don't need that, 2 side dishes and a dessert with every meal. That, like you said, the hyperpalatability. If you're just eating one thing like a dog, you're going to get bored with it eventually.
Right. So you mentioned a little bit about oxidative priority. Can we dig into that a little bit? Is something that you guys I know are very big on.
Yeah, your body has the fuel sources I just mentioned earlier: alcohol, ketones, protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And then that order is your oxidative priority of your body. And it makes a lot of sense from a biological standpoint because it goes basically in reverse order of storage. So if you think about that, the body, your blood vessels are your fuel lines. You don't want too much fuel in those fuel lines at any time because you could burn up the engine, right? Glucose of 500, it can be lethal. You can't have too much fuel in the fuel lines. So your body wants to tightly control that. So if you have a bunch of fuel coming in, let's say all those fuels I listed are all coming in through the diet at the same time, your body's going to prioritize it and say, look, I need to worry about the things that I can't store first. Because the things that I can store easily, like fat, I'll just store those away so I can deal with these other things that I can't store so they don't get too high and kill you, right? It just makes sense. So alcohol is the number one oxidative priority because there's no storage. You can't store alcohol anywhere. So it's got to be burned off and processed before it can move on to any other fuel source. Next, ketones. So it's got to use, if you got excess ketones coming from like an exogenous ketone source, it's going to deal with that before it moves on to any other fuel because there's limited storage for ketones. Protein also has limited storage, but it's preferentially used, as I described, for muscle protein synthesis. It takes like 5 ATP to turn protein into glucose, and then another 2 ATP to use glucose for fuel. Why would the body do that and burn all that energy to turn that into fuel to be used in the cells when it can use glucose or fat for a lot less energy? It just doesn't want to do that unless it absolutely has to. The only way it really does it is if all you're eating is protein. Then it'll start turning some of that into fuel to have fuel come. So that's next oxidative priority. Next is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates have a moderate storage capacity. You can store it as glycogen in your muscle or your liver, and that's about 1,500 to maybe 2,000 calories for most people. So it's kind of a moderate level. Last is fat. Fat has theoretically unlimited storage capacity, right? There's people with hundreds of pounds of stored body fat on their bodies. So that is the last oxidative priority because the body can just store it away and deal with the other fuels. And so when you look at that and you say, okay, how am I going to get down to burning stored body fat for fuel? That's how we leverage a ketogenic diet to enable it, is that we don't drink any alcohol, don't take exogenous ketones, only consume enough protein to keep your muscle mass and repair tissues, so that moderate protein level. Don't limited to no carbohydrates, and then use that fat as, okay, I'll get some fat, but not too much, so that I'm forcing my body to use stored body fat for fuel. So it kind of explains why this works.
Got it. And so to be even more practical about some of this stuff, one of the things so I first did a ketogenic diet in undergrad when I was at University of Wisconsin. I don't know when that was, 2000. It's like 10 years ago. Wow, I'm getting old. And one of the things that I figured out then, I know you guys recommend a lot if people want to lose fat or all this stuff, that just to not drink alcohol at all because of this oxidative priority. Yeah. However, of course, I was an undergrad. I was drinking more than I probably should have. But I actually thought through this, looking at a biochemistry textbook of how things were stored, and kind of figured out this little trick too. Whereas I recommended to my friends who didn't want to get fat and have that freshman 15 and stuff like that, pack on. My thing was, okay, if we're going to drink later in the evening, eat as much protein only until like 2 or 3 hours before we started drinking. And then we could have drinks without storing as much fat as we would otherwise. And so I don't recommend to get so excessive we have to plan around it, but I think this is kind of practical for people who think of, hey, I'm going to a social event and I know there's going to be alcohol and maybe I want to use it as a way to, relax or, be social or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that in my opinion. I think that sometimes, coming back to this, people could, realize that one, it's non-essential. Of course, it's going to impede goals, but to optimize it and to prioritize a little bit, where on those days, that was my strategy. Any thoughts on that as far as just minimizing the impact if people are going to, say, have a couple glasses of wine or a drink with a friend or two?
Yeah, exactly that. Is you got to look at that oxidative priority and say, okay, if I've got alcohol coming in, anything that comes with it is going to be, stored off as stored fuel because it's got to deal with the alcohol. And so if you have a few drinks and then you get the munchies and you have nachos, right, all that fat and carbohydrate coming in from those nachos, most of that's going to get stored right away because it's got to deal with the alcohol first. So looking at it that way, another really interesting tidbit that kind of proves oxidative priority and the power of it, that people that are alcoholics, so extreme alcoholics that, first thing in the morning, they're drunk and always have chronically elevated alcohol levels in their blood. They have, no matter what they eat, they have A1Cs in the 4s because the body is just storing everything that's coming into the blood away because it's always dealing with the alcohol. But don't recommend that to lower your A1C level, but it proves how powerful this oxidative priority is.
Interesting. Any other kind of applications you would recommend for people with oxidative priority in mind, just to give more practical advice?
Well, I think that in addition to thermic effect of food is why a protein-sparing modified fast is so powerful, because you can clear out all those other fuels. You up the protein a little bit, which again, thermic effect of food means you're getting less total calories coming in, and then you bring the fat down a lot, so you force your body to use more stored body fat. And I think protein-sparing modified fast is probably one of the most powerful tools for ramping up weight loss or breaking a stall. We actually prefer this over a actual water fast where you don't eat any calories for a day or two, just because it preserves that lean mass and gives you a lot of the same benefits.
What about as far as research that you've done or experiments in yourself, where I know that obviously during a fast you're going to be losing a lot of lean mass, and I think there's debate out there right now whether that's stored glycogen that's being used up, whether that's hydration issues or anything like that. But having kind of this stress-induced rebound effect, where after a refeeding of a certain way, after a fast, a long-term water fast, people either going back to baseline or increasing their lean tissue mass. Have you seen any of this in people you've worked with?
So yeah, I mean, if we do it, so I think there's probably some therapeutic level things that a longer fast is beneficial to, things like, cancer or, liver liver disease and things that it might be beneficial to. But the key there is we always tell people, if you're after the fast, you have to refeed properly. So you need to get lots of protein so that you rebuild that lean mass that you lost. Now, I know there's, again, controversy of whether you lose lean mass or not and what is being lost or not. But the fact is, and studies have shown that in the first day of a water-only fast, first day or so, you lose a little over a pound, and then it's about a third of a pound of lean mass after that. If you're ketogenic to start, you might skip that initial part and go right to a third of a pound of lean mass per day. But even so, if you go 3 days on a water fast, you've lost a pound of muscle or lean mass. A pound of lean mass, I mean, if you go to the gym and you work out, you know how hard it is to build muscle and lean mass. So that should be precious to us. And that's why we only look at that for possibly, some chronic disease type conditions, not for weight loss.
Interesting. What about the case studies of people fasting for 100, 200, 300 days as far as that theory goes? Is like, wouldn't that rationale assume that those people would have zero lean mass by the end of that fast?
Well, I think there's maybe kind of an inverse curve here with how much body fat you have to lose, right? So what's happening when you fast? Your body needs some glucose, like we talked about before. And because you're not getting protein in the diet to turn into glucose, when the blood glucose gets too low, it starts using, protein off the body. That's what's happening. That's why you lose that lean mass. But one thing that needs to be a factor is how much stored body fat you have. If you've got a lot of stored body fat, 100 pounds of extra stored body fat, your body can actually use that to make glucose. See, your adipose site, that's your cell where your fat is stored. The fat is stored in those adipocytes as a triglyceride molecule, which is 3 free fatty acid molecules linked together by glycerol molecule. First thing it does when it wants to burn fat for fuel is it pulls off the glycerol, cleaves off the glycerol molecule. So now your 3 free fatty acid molecules go into the blood and get used as fuel. That's one thing that people sometimes can mistake as well. Ketones are not your primary fuel when you're ketogenic. It's free fatty acids being burned directly in the muscle and tissues. Some of that free fatty acid can go to the liver and be turned into ketones. But what's important too is that glycerol molecule goes into the blood, into the liver, and 3 glycerol molecules make 1 glucose molecule. So if you're heavily utilizing stored fat for fuel, you're making about 90% fuel from fat and about 10% fuel from glucose. You're actually taking those glycerol molecules and making glucose instead of using protein through gluconeogenesis. So utilizing a lot of stored body fat, if you've got a lot of stored body fat during a fast, will probably reduce the amount of protein that's being used because you got all this glycerol that's going into circulation.
Right. One of the things about fasting as well that I think is important that people realize is when you're fasting, it's a stress that is placed upon the body. And so, for instance, if you have this high amount of allostatic stress that is coming in from different sources, for instance, I just recently had a major ankle injury. I had a lot of stuff going on at work. I was traveling. All this stress throughout my life in different sources. I actually intentionally remove fasting as a tool so that it wouldn't stress my body out, so it had enough time to address all the other sources. Have you used this type of approach with people that you've worked with before?
Yeah, like in our book, we talk about all these inputs, right, that lead to disease. Stress is one of them. And the last thing you want to do is add more stress, right? And so fasting is definitely not essential to lose weight or to be ketogenic. We find that most people, it comes naturally. They're just not as hungry to eat 3 meals. So they just eat 2 meals and, adjust that way. But yeah, if you've got other inputs, stress, chronic disease, things that need to be considered, fasting is not essential to be ketogenic or to reverse those diseases and lose weight.
Right. One of the things that people ask is like, oh, are you in an 18-6 eating window, or how long is your fast per day? And my answer is just, I eat when I'm hungry, and simple as that. And because I eat, I think, very
Yeah.
nutrient dense food, that I'm not hungry as much. And my body's kind of adapted to 1 to 2 meals a day. And that's just how I feel. And so I just listen to my body over the long term. I think that when you get super nutrient dense food and a lot of protein, that you're not hungry every 90 minutes, every 60 minutes. And I think that originally when people switch from a standard American diet to a ketogenic diet, and they can do a couple things. One, it's just hard to have that switch from a metabolic standpoint. Two, I think a lot of times food choice is subpar, and people like to slather their cream cheese into little keto fat bombs and chow those down. But I think that having low amount of nutrients, your body can still kick into this hunger phase all the time, and so it makes intermittent fasting really hard. And so I think if people say that they're hungry or it's not working or fasting is really hard, I say, okay, eat some organ meat and tell me how you feel. Spend the next day eating a steak and organ meat every day, and then tell me how easy it is to fast.
Yeah, definitely. There's number one, it could be just that they're still in that transition phase. We talk about, in our book, about this. There's kind of 3 phases of being ketogenic. There's, as soon as you lower your carbohydrates below like 20 grams a day, in 2 to 3 days, you're going to start seeing elevated blood ketones. But you're not really getting that optimal state yet. You're not getting the energy. You're not getting, the improved moods and things. That takes longer, usually about 4 to 6 weeks. And the reason is your body's actually making more mitochondria, so it can burn more fat. And that's kind of that fat adapted state that you want to get to. So hunger can be an issue during that time because your body's not as efficient at burning fat yet. It's not made enough mitochondria. So that period, we actually tell people, if add a snack, add what you need, you don't have to intermittent fast at that stage because it's going to be harder, and just let it come naturally.
Yeah, I think you guys have a really good recommendation in that phase to utilize those fat bombs and higher fat things, because you just can't access the same amount of stored fat as you can in that first 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes 6 to 8. I've seen with people who are super metabolically damaged. And so what are the triggers that people can look for that once say someone hasn't tried keto yet, they're just starting, and this initial phase, they're just having three meals a day or so. They have a moderate protein, limited carbs, a decent amount of fat, so that they have energy sources. When should they realize when they've adapted and when they should start pulling back the fat if their goal is fat loss?
Mostly just kind of go by your body, but also make sure to be mindful about why you're eating. Another thing that I think people have lost in our modern society of endless food and eating every hour is hunger signaling. We have to go back to realizing it's kind of like a muscle. You got to use it, right? You got to let that hunger be realized before you eat, instead of mindlessly just chewing on things because we're bored, or those type of issues that happen. That really just go by your body and understand your hunger signaling. And if you're not hungry, don't eat. Focus on getting enough protein each day, but never eat just because you want to meet a macro level other than protein, or you're just bored. Just go by how your body feels.
So how have you kind of gone through the phase of working through ketogenic diet, and what does your day-to-day look like currently?
So right now, I'm a little bit of an interesting case at the moment. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease about 6 months ago. And so I'm through some pretty intensive treatment for that. I actually have lost quite a bit of lean mass and weight over the past 2 to 3 years that I didn't really want to lose, but because of the disease, I actually have been. So I've been eating more than I typically do, but still not really gaining any weight, and I still haven't gained any lean mass as a result. But I eat. I'd say I push 200 grams of protein a day, and I don't really track at this point, again, because I'm not trying to lose any weight. I just eat to satiety at this point with the right macro breakdowns. But limited carbs, I have a little bit of veggies, whether it's, onions or tomatoes or those cauliflower, those kind of things. But I would say primarily animal proteins in my diet. and the fat that comes with, and maybe some added sauces. That's primarily what I eat. I always take collagen every morning for joint health and hair and nails and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm a little bit of a different case. I eat tons of red meat, and yet I have low red blood cell count and low iron. So the disease is kind of messing me up a bit with that.
Interesting. Was that a change from before you realized that you had some of these symptoms?
Partly, yeah. 6 months ago, I've had this pain, chronic pain for 4 to 5 years now, and never knew what it was. I just thought I had an old back injury from a long time ago. Thought maybe it was just related to that, but it was different, and it just kind of spread to my neck and shoulders and things. And finally got diagnosis in December that it was Lyme, and so I've been treating that. But in the diagnosis, there was 2 things that pointed to the diagnosis. Number one, I got a test done and showed my CRP, C-reactive protein, the inflammation marker, which we tell clients you want to be less than 2, ideally less than 1. And pretty much every client we have that we put on a well-formulated keto diet gets there within a few months. And I've been keto for years, and my CRP is 50.
Oh, wow.
And so I immediately knew there was something wrong. Something's going on. And digging into it further, we found that my red blood cell count was low, my iron levels were low, and then we eventually found the Lyme disease diagnosis. And so at that point, in over the past 12 months prior to that, I had changed nothing about my diet and lost about 20 pounds. And I had no explanation for it other than, this obviously Lyme disease. But
yeah, so this is something that my family members have had problems with this, with Lyme, and keto has helped. But like you said, there's some modifications for some people to make due to what stage they're at. So you said that the diagnosis was helped along by looking at the CRP, the red blood cells, the iron count. Any other tests that you did to confirm this? Because I think that this is one of these problems where people get a little discouraged based on the kind of the way this disease runs its course, and maybe we can dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, we could do a whole show on Lyme for sure. I got a standard Western blot Lyme test, and it came back negative.
Right, and so this is where I think people get discouraged, because a lot of doctors will order just that and be like, "Oh, it's negative. It's not Lyme. Trust me, it's good to go." And so
that was like a year ago,
right?
And so what happened was, our publisher, he's very knowledgeable about Lyme. They're writing a book about it. He encouraged me to get the Genix test, which is much more sensitive and tests more bands of Lyme. And there I showed positive. And so it's an expensive test, but it's important to get the right test done to ensure you have or don't.
Can you
the standard Western blot Lyme test gives false negatives, which it says negative when you're really positive about almost 80% of the time. So a lot of people that have it are being told they don't.
Right. Could you just, do you remember what the exact name of the test is, in case we want to link to it in the show notes?
Yeah, IGENEX, IGENIX. It's I think like for the full panel with co-infections and all of that, it's like $2,000. But it's very sensitive. It tests all the Lyme bands. The Western blot only tests some of the bands. So yeah, if you are in this state like I was, I definitely encourage getting that test.
And what are some of the symptoms that you had other than weight loss? Obviously, the increased inflammation, some joint pain, anything else? Because I know that there can be a lot of symptoms here.
Yeah, one of the telltale ones was the migrating joint pain. So you get it feels like you sprained your knee, but you didn't do anything. It just suddenly you wake up one morning and my right knee just hurts like I sprained it. And that can migrate down to my ankle the next day, up into my hip the next day. The Lyme spirochetes, they like to feed on hydrolonic acid and collagen, which are in your joints. And so they'll move around to your joints, consuming that. That's one of the reasons I take collagen, is to replenish, because I know they're feasting on it. But that migrating joint pain is a big indicator. And for me personally, I also had this pain that slowly progressed up my back and into my neck, and that pain at the base of the skull and the neck, that's another kind of indicator, because the Lyme like to hang out there as well. I don't know if it was my diet that helped with this, but I never got to the neurological level, the brain fog, the trouble focusing, and those kind of things. Even though I had this pain for so many years and dealt with it for so long, I never got to that point, which, I mean, I don't have any evidence, but I'd like to contribute that to, the whole time I was on a good diet, low inflammation diet.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So my sister was not really keto for a long time and started having progressive symptoms, kind of similar to you as far as joint pain, but then she also had headaches, fogginess, neuropathies, cloudy vision, things like that. And this is one of those things where, I think it's becoming a trendy diagnosis, but I do think that some people in specific areas do have a problem with this, and it is going underdiagnosed in a very broad spectrum. And so, something that if they have problems and, they were maybe exposed to, in woods and anywhere, and maybe had some tick exposure or things like that, it might be something to look for. So we'll be sure to link to that test you mentioned to make sure that people get right diagnosis. But
yeah, definitely.
My sister's switching from a standard diet into a ketogenic diet. And at this point too, like I sent her a bunch of the MCT oil powder in liquid that we have, and she was taking a lot of that. And she actually felt within 2 to 3 weeks, almost all of her symptoms disappeared.
Yeah. There's actually a part of the carnivore community got led to carnivore because of their Lyme. There's some people I follow on Twitter that are big advocates for carnivore, and they went that route because of their Lyme disease, and they saw drastic relief in their symptoms. Now, what I would encourage is you also attack the Lyme, as well as, just because the symptoms have gone drastically down, your inflammation's down and the pain's down, doesn't mean you've killed the Lyme, right? I also encourage, attacking the Lyme as well. But yeah, a lot of people see a lot of relief from a ketogenic diet, or even going full to a carnivore diet. In their symptoms, they see a lot of relief.
Are you doing kind of traditional route of attacking the Lyme as far as like doxycycline and stuff like that, or what's been your approach moving forward here?
Yeah, and one other thing I want to mention on that, a lot of these diseases that we don't know the source of today, like MS or ALS, there may be a connection to what happens is if Lyme progresses far enough, your body starts to get autoimmune reactions and starts to kind of attack itself. There's one of the top Lyme doctors in the country, Dr. Klingart. He has yet to see an MS patient come into his office that didn't also test positive for Lyme disease.
Wow.
And so, fibromyalgia, some of these things that may actually just be undiagnosed Lyme. I mean, that's, I think, potentially a huge thing here, but just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, like this is something that I think is just misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. So it's thanks for sharing your experience with this stuff.
Yeah, and as far as what I'm doing kind of everything. There's a Cowden protocol that's a whole bunch of tinctures that you do 4 times a day for a month, and I'm doing all of that. I'm also doing antibiotic. It's important to do these 3 antibiotics together, one of them which is a cyst buster, because the thing with Lyme that makes it so awful to treat, especially when it gets chronic, is that the Lyme spirochete, it will actually revert to cyst form or go into a cyst whenever the environment is not favorable. Well, when you start taking antibiotics, that's not a good environment for them. They go into a cyst form. They can stay there for long periods. And as soon as the antibiotics go away, they come back out of the cyst form and they're back. And so that's why you got to have a cyst buster as well to bust those cysts and take care of them so they don't just reinfect you. And this, again, back to the standard treatment. What do? They do, doxycycline for 4 weeks, and they say you're cured. And yet, the Lyme just went to cyst and comes back. And that's why people, a lot of times they'll go on antibiotics, feel better, and then a month or 2 later feel bad again.
So what are the other 2, besides doxycycline, what are the other 2 antibiotics that help that you've been taking or experimenting with? Like the cyst buster you said. Is there a specific?
Yeah, Tindamax. It's a pretty powerful one. I also did. So, like I said, we could do a whole show on this. I did a whole series of antiparasitics as well. The problem when Lyme becomes chronic, your immune system, with that chronic inflammation, your immune system gets broken down. Things can creep in that shouldn't be there, like parasites or heavy metals and these type of things. So I did a bunch of antiparasitic medications first, and then now I'm attacking the Lyme with the 3 antibiotics I'm taking. One is Tindamax, which is a very strong cyst buster that antibiotic, and then one of them. So the reason you want 3 is you want kind of the doxycycline or whatever general antibiotic. You want one that busts cysts, and then you want one that crosses the brain barrier to deal with any issue there. And so you kind of want that 3. The best science of the best Lyme doctors, they do this kind of 3 antibiotic protocol.
Good. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I know it's a lot to go through.
Yeah.
Hope you a speedy recovery.
Thanks.
So if people want to follow along, I don't know if you're publishing much about that, but anything that you guys are doing, I think we're coming up an hour here. So
yeah, we have on our blog, I'm periodically, whenever I have information to talk about and things about Lyme, I'll do a post on it. But yeah, mariamindbodyhealth.com. That's our blog, and we post stuff there.
Okay. And you guys have another website as well.
Keto-adapted.com. And that's kind of our subscription site where people can get support, attend weekly live webinars, and all this kind of stuff.
Awesome, Craig. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. We'll link to all that stuff as well. And hopefully we'll chat soon.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't, I would love a review. Just go over to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and pop in a review so we can get found by more people, get better guests, and have the information that you need. So please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. And if you're new to keto, head on over to perfectketo.com/podcast and enter your email for all our top tips and guides on getting started with the ketogenic diet. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.